Okay, so, I wasn't quite sure what to say about this subject because, you know, it's a really important topic for me. So, in preparation for making this video, I watched For the Bible Tells Me So, Love Free or Die, and I watched Prayers for Bobby twice. I also rewatched Angels in America, which is kind of related, but also not. I mean, Joe Pitt's storyline in Angels in America certainly is related. Um, yeah. But none of these things really helped me figure out what I wanted to say. Um, so I typed some things out, and this is kind of what I came up with, really. Um, so I think in the States, this is a totally different issue. The whole issue is totally different than what it is in Europe. In the States, I think the fight is very much against the homophobia of anti-gay Christians. In Europe, the fight is against what the lead singer of a band called Skillet termed deophobia, meaning the fear of God. Because the general movement in Europe, and I say Europe, but I really can only really speak from my experiences in the UK, but that general movement really is to reject religion, and in some instances to bash religion in a mocking and cruel way. And the general rejection of religion is often connected to how hypocritical, homophobic, sexist, and ridiculous the church often looks, and often is. So to talk about being gay and Christian, or actually in my case female to male, transgendered, pansexual, and Christian, is different for me living in the UK than it would be for someone living in the US. That said, that does not mean I don't experience anti-gay sentiment from Christians. I generally avoid churches which do not specifically mark themselves as LGBT affirming because I don't want to go to them. And, to be misgendered or called she, and then have to explain, no, it's he, and then have them do a double take and have to explain I'm trans, only to have, an exorcism performed on me, to be referred to some wonderful Christian psychiatrist that they know that could help me, or just a plain be shouted at and thrown out. All these things terrify me. When someone says I'm Christian, it terrifies me. And in many ways, I know it shouldn't because I'm Christian, but although I've gotten out of the habit of it now, I actually used to say I'm Christian, but I'm not like those other Christians. Whereas now I just say I'm Christian and let people come to the realization that Christians come in all shapes and sizes, spiritual ideologies, political views, genders, sexes, races, and sexual orientation. But, in terms of talking about the gay Christian movement, there's one thing I've noticed that is really starting to bug me, and that is that especially in the liberal gay Christian movement, there's a tendency to talk about grace and how all-encompassing it is, and to quote Bible passages that talk about judging and how we shouldn't judge. It's all very well and good. Perhaps a good thing to remind people who believe that homosexuality is a sin, and also just to remind everyone in general. Can we as Christians ever really get bored of talking about how amazing God's love is, and how amazing Jesus is, and how he died for us and took on our sins to save us, and how grace is so amazing? And this is not a Philip Yancey reference because I haven't gotten around to reading that book yet. But, major but, why are we talking about grace when we, the gay Christian movement, well, in the side A portion of it, don't believe that homosexuality is a sin? When I read The Children Are Free, re-examining the biblical evidence on same-sex relationships by Reverend Jeff Miner and John Tyler Connolly, no, I'm not going to say what you think I am. I actually, when I read that book, kind of thought, well, this side A view of the Bible kind of sucks. It's not a very strong academic or biblical theological position, but I knew that the side A view was right, and I knew that from experience, from reason, from prayer, from my view of God and what they are like. I've started referring to God as they rather than he, because I just think referring to God as he is patriarchal societal nonsense. But the biblical view for the biblical support, for the view of that homosexuality is not a sin, it seemed a bit lame. At least based on The Children Are Free, which you can tell, I'm not a fan of. Don't get me wrong, it's a great starting point, but it is exactly that, it's a starting point. and really it was intended to be published as a leaflet. And I think if you look at it as a leaflet and not a book, then it's perfectly acceptable. But, you know, I'm not going to pick apart The Children Are Free in this video. If you want me to in another video, then I'm more than happy to do so. And also, I'm sure that many of you have read The Children Are Free and have found it to be, you know, eye-opening, revelation-like experience. And I'm not trying to discredit that. That's great, but it didn't do it for me. But when I watched For the Bible Tells Me So, I felt like the side A view of the Bible became much more concrete for me, in that it became, you know, I realised that it was an academically and biblically sound view of the Bible. Before I heard side A views of the Bible, you know, I heard them as pro-gay propaganda, and now, you know, I've realised actually, of all the views on what the Bible has to say about homosexuality, the side A view is the most biblically sound and academically accurate. So particularly you know, one example of this is, you know, the explanation of abomination, meaning ritualistically unclean, that it does not mean immoral. The Judaic law was written for the people of that time period and not for all time. You know, that became a lot clearer for me. You know, basically meaning abomination means that it doesn't, you know, when it says homosexuality is an abomination, it does not mean, you know, homosexuality is immoral, and should not be practiced, and that's not really the right word, but, you know, it does not mean that homosexuality is morally wrong. That's what I was looking for. You know, it means it's ritualistically unclean, meaning it shouldn't, in terms of ritual, and in terms for those people, ritualistically meaning connected to the rituals which the people of that time practiced, you know, homosexuality was marked as being something that they shouldn't do, along with all the other things that, you know, was marked that they shouldn't do. So it does not mean it's immoral in the same way that eating shrimp is not immoral for all time. It means that ritualistically we don't do this. You know, connected to our rituals, our tradition, our you know, all of that, connected to that, those rituals, those traditions, all of those things. Homosexuality is unclean and we don't do it. It does not mean it's morally wrong by any stretch of the imagination. And all of that became a lot clearer for me. You know, before people would say it was meant for that you know, that law was meant for that time period and it doesn't apply to today. But I kind of felt like they were explaining away something that was very clearly written in the Bible. But now with this new explanation of the terminology within the text, you know, in reference to the word abomination, it brings a whole new meaning to that statement, and that statement, I think, now speaks truth to me. You know, was written for that time period because of this explanation of abomination. You know, yeah. And the other thing is, I always felt like that explanation of that passage, it was always like, oh well, you know, you eat shrimp and you'll touch the skin of a dead pig. They'll do it in reference to all these other things and say that, well, you don't do those. But I kind of feel like picking out those things, it doesn't mean that homosexuality is not morally wrong. Actually, you know, you could flip that and you could say, well, you're not doing all these other things that are written in the Judaic law, so you should start doing them. That doesn't, you know, that argument, comparing it to all the other things that are called abominations, does not kind of categorically say, ergo, where, you know, side A view is right. It actually, it could be viewed as a criticism of the fact that you don't follow it all, and neither do we. And I again think that's kind of lame. Again, I kind of think that's like saying, well, you don't follow it all, neither are we. We're both going to cherry pick, and neither of us should judge either of us for cherry picking. When actually, if you look at it, it's much more biblical than that. It's much more academic. It's a much more position of strength. Really, is that what you realise is based on the definition of the terminology abomination. What you realise is we're not tied down to having to follow this Judaic law. We're not tied down to having to follow those things that were called abominations. We're not tied down to having to avoid them. because abomination means ritualistically unclean and not immoral. So that was my beef kind of with Leviticus. But I've kind of gone off the point a little bit. But what I was trying to say is, going back to the gay Christian movement and how quite often I feel like they hide behind this idea of grace. We don't need grace. We don't need to hide. We do need grace. That was completely wrong. We need grace. Everyone needs grace. We don't need to hide behind grace with this issue, with the issue of homosexuality. If we truly believe that homosexuality is not a sin, then why are we hiding behind grace? I mean, why is the gay Christian movement hiding behind the idea of grace, regardless of how amazing grace is and how much everyone needs it? When biblically speaking, I believe, and majority of the gay Christian movement believes that if you study the Bible properly, then homosexuality quite clearly isn't a sin. So that was my beef, really, and I think one of the reasons which they do this is because there's still a lot of internal homophobia within the gay Christian movement. There's still a lot of external societal things that exist within the gay Christian movement, and we need to iron them out. We've heard growing up, our entire lives, homosexuality is a sin, it's morally wrong, etc. And I think we've just been bashed with the Bible and hearing these things so much to the point that we've kind of come to the conclusion, of where I was, which is, before I say that, we've been bashed with this so much that it's become part of our psyche and we can't quite get rid of it. And we need to get rid of it to move forward. Because, we know, and, I think, that it's not a sin. I think maybe the gay Christian movement might be where I was a while back, in that, we know from experience, we know from reason, we know from the relationship that we have with the living God, our experience of God, from prayer, from all these different things, that homosexuality is not a sin. And now what we need to do is to realise that it's also true biblically, and for biblical scholars to build up the strength of the side A biblical position, and to show how it's the academically stronger, it's the more biblically sound position, rather than hiding behind grace, which we don't need to do, because homosexuality is not a sin. And so those kind of are my thoughts. And if anyone watching this has thoughts that they want to send back, I'm not going to lie, this is quite a touchy issue for me. So, respond. I may or may not respond. I may or may not ignore what you have to say, particularly if it's going to be incredibly anti-gay or anti-Christian. Either of those things is going to ring off a lot of alarm bells with me. Yeah. In fact, now that I've said that, I don't know, respond. But anyway, the point being, I think I've said all the things that I wanted to say. And I am really interested in hearing what other people have to say, so do respond. But like I said, anything incredibly anti-gay or anti-Christian, I'm going to ignore. So, yeah.